Yulia here, and today with me at the podcast Achieve More with Less, I have a very special guest, Neil Taylor, the Managing Director of HMV. The timing couldn't be better for us to have this conversation today, simply because HMV had different experiences in the past, and they actually went through the process of closing and reopening locations about 1.5 to 2 years ago. So I was very much looking forward to have a conversation with Neil and pick his brain and share with everybody else on the lessons learned and ask a few more questions. So Neil, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, no problem. Good to see you as well.
Thank you. So I'll get right into this. So the very first question I have for you, as I mentioned, so HMV has experience with reopening the stores in the past, and I wanted to ask you if you can maybe share with our audience 3 to 5 main tips on reopening locations.
Okay, I guess the first one is all about communication with your team that are not there at the moment. In this situation, they're not there. In the past where we've had to reopen stores, they've not been there, they're at home. So it's calling them, speaking to them, first of all checking on their welfare, checking how they are, checking how their family are, especially at the moment. So it's really important you get that rapport with them. Then I think you need to talk to them about what the expectations are when they're coming back to work. So when you're coming back, when do you want them back? Where do they need to be? What time? Any sort of other information in regards, do they need to have any training, especially with this situation right now? There's obviously a lot of PPE training, and they need to make sure they know what they're doing when they come back into the store, because it's quite a worrying time for them and they're probably all quite anxious. So I think communication would be the number one thing. I think the second thing would probably be making sure when they come back you have some form of checklist of activity. So what actions need to be taken when you get back in. So have they got a list of going, make sure you do this, do this, do this, and do this, and they can tick it all off and make sure it's action. So everyone is crystal clear on the expectations. So HMV week on your store expectations, but there are differences now with COVID-19, especially with hygiene and cleaning. So is everyone aware of the expectations when they come back? And I guess the third one is having an understanding with them that it's going to be a little bit different. So it might not be as many staff as were in the shop before. There's probably going to be different expectations of people in regards working, what jobs they're doing. It's not just the same old job it was before the crisis, and there's different things you're going to need to cross-train them, and there's different things you're going to need to be able to do when they come back into the workplace. So I guess communication, expectations, and cross-training effectively, making sure that they can do quite a few jobs when they come back in would be the important things.
And from your experience reopening in the past, is there anything you can think of you wish you could have done differently and you probably would implement in your reopening process today?
Yeah, I think reality is reopening before. I think the real key issue is I wish we'd never have closed some in the first place, and that would have probably gone back to the deal with the landlords. So historically, when we've spoken to landlords and not got to a deal to reopen a store, we end up getting there in the end by a bit of compromise on both sides, and the stores have reopened. But we've wasted a month, maybe 6 weeks of not being able to get the deal done and get it over the line and push it through. So that's basically from a prior admin position where you're in administration, you come out of administration, you need to do a new deal with the landlord. We haven't done it. The store shuts. 6 weeks later, the store reopens again, and all that time and hassle for the staff, and all of the time and the hassle that's costed us has costed us 6 weeks worth of trade just to end up where yourself and the landlord wanted to be in the first place. I think with this, it's a little bit different, but one of the biggest conversations outside of your people is the landlords on this period as well. Most retailers in the UK won't have paid their rent in April, May or June, and won't have paid their service charges in April, May and June. So by rights, we're all 3 months behind with all of those costs. So, and we appreciate the landlords can't afford to lose all of their income, and the landlords need to appreciate that we can't afford to pay them when we've not had any store sales. So I think we're both, landlords and retailers, are coming from a position of we need to do something, but we need to work together. And I say, going off historical history, we sometimes need to come to the table a little bit quicker than we have done in the past, but the landlords also need to do that. So I guess for people listening, one of the biggest things is to make sure they come to some form of agreement with the landlord and get a deal in place, because this doesn't drag on, because otherwise it'll end up with a lot of problems for them going forward, for the retailer, and the landlord effectively is left with a position of where you potentially could get evicted ultimately out of the store, and nobody wants that. So get an agreement early with your landlords and get it done quickly and get it out of the way would be definitely a key bit of advice, and make sure you speak to them and communicate with them.
Any tips on negotiating with landlords?
Just try and keep it professional and try and keep it, everyone should have the same aim. That's having a shop with a tenant in it that's making a profit, and they're making a profit. So I think we've got to appreciate, as retailers, they need to make money, but we need to make money as well. So finding that common ground very quickly and being respectful of each other. You see landlords sometimes throwing around legal threats, saying if you don't pay your rent by this day, we'll take court proceedings. I find that really frustrating. It's like, just pick the phone up and have a conversation, human to human, and try and get a deal done for the best interest of both parties, because we don't want to have a store that loses money, and they don't want to lose money either. So we've got that common ground, if you like. Mm-hmm. But it's finding the common ground and just being respectful of each other going forward. I think that would be a kind of thing you should be looking at, really, to get a deal done quickly and move on. Especially for those of you those people that have got a chain of stores, a number of stores where it's going to take a bit of time to get the deals over the line. Just try and get it done as quickly as possible.
And speaking of the landlords, I've also heard that especially the shopping mall owners, they also, right now, as they start to reopen, they've introduced additional requirements for compliance for the stores. Can you maybe share some of the things that maybe were surprising of what malls are doing? There's a document in the UK called COVID Secure. It's a long document. And it's got a lot of things that we need to put in place as retailers, which is absolutely fine. We want to protect our staff, we want to protect the public, and we don't want to cause any problems. So that document in itself is quite chunky, and you look at it and you go, fair enough. The 2 metre rule in the UK is quite challenging already for retailers. It's a metre in the rest of Europe, but the 2 metre rule is going to make it really challenging. And on top of that, the shopping centres have put a load more compliance, not everyone, but some of them, over and above. And some of it feels like a bit of a tick box exercise by them, just to be seen to be doing things. But it makes it quite difficult in some instances. And, there's been claims of, if you don't do all of this, we won't let you open on time, which again is, and I think it genuinely is, some of the team that work for us are basically looking and having conversations with those shopping centres rather than just doing it via email and picking up the phone and going, what do you actually need from this? I think the biggest challenge we've probably got in the UK with the 2 metre rule is how many people you can physically get in your shop at any given point. And if they can't come into your shop, it's, do they queue outside? Now, some of the shopping centre stores have said they won't allow queues outside the store. So there's one shopping centre that's doing traffic lights in each store, green and red. And if it's green, you can go in. If it's red, you can't, because they don't want queues. And then some of them are looking at how do you control a queue outside of the store. And obviously, if your neighbour next door has got a queue outside of their store, how's that going to work? And I think there's a lot of things that, we've done a lot of preparation. There's a lot of work by the team that's gone on to get us ready to reopen. But I think the reality is we're going to come across problems from day one.
that we don't even know what those problems look like yet. We've tried to second guess every possibility, and you know some of the people that work in my team and how sort of thorough they are, and we've tried to get to think of every single option, but there's no way we will have done. Something will come up on day one which we haven't even thought of, and it's how do you deal with that, and what do you actually have to do. But I guess the best thing you can do is be as prepared as possible, really.
Yeah, and I suppose be prepared to adjust as you go, because like
Right.
everything is changing.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question I have with you is actually moving away a little bit from the physical and talking about the e-commerce. So HMV traditionally has been mostly brick and mortar sales, very experience driven, fan driven, location visits. So you transitioning so fast from brick and mortar to e-commerce, and are you going to transition back, or what were the lessons learned for you to adopt the e-commerce model, and how is that going for you?
Well, I guess in every sort of crisis you look for a bit of a silver lining, and at HMV we've had a few crises over the years, so it's the silver lining for us has been our e-commerce business. So we are online, store.hmv.com, if you want to go shopping there. That business has gone crazy. So our sales expectations for May and for April has been 5 times expectations. So it's been great. And the warehouse team and the distribution team have done an amazing job, because not only has the business gone mad in terms of turnover, they've also had to do it on a reduced headcount in the warehouse at any given time because of social distancing. So we've had a bit of a double whammy where less people in the warehouse, but a lot more orders coming through. And they've done opportunity to say thank you to them, really, because they've done an amazing job. And I think for us, probably versus our roadmap of where we wanted to be on e-commerce, it's probably fast-tracked us by about 18 months. So from a sales perspective, what we've got to do now after stores reopen is not forget that and keep a real focus on e-commerce, because it is going to be a bigger part of our mix in the future for sure. We've got lots of plans in the pipeline from an IT development perspective for e-commerce, where we want to make the system quicker and more options for customers and be more omni-channel. All of those things as a business, we really need to fast track and just get on with as soon as possible, and actually start putting e-commerce at the top of our priority list. If we have meetings in the building and our offices, as a physical retailer, we always tend to talk about stores first. So historically, they've always been 90% of our turnover. So it's always been about stores, and e-commerce is a bit of a second relation. And to us now, it's how do you put it on the first item on your agenda so it stays top of mind? Because at the moment, outside of talking about reopening stores, all of the commercial reviews have all been about e-commerce, because that's the only thing we've been trading. So the focus by everyone on it that's in the offices at the moment, or not in the offices, working from home, but in a work environment, has been really good in terms of focusing on e-com. Mm-hmm. What we can't do is open shops back up in a couple of weeks and then forget about e-com again. It's got to stay top of mind. And if anything, from an investment perspective, it's how do we actually put more behind it and get it moving quicker in the direction that we want it to look like. We had an investment plan for 2 years, for this year and for 2021. This year, we've obviously lost the first 6 months really on being able to do anything, because we've not had IT team that we've got. Obviously, some of them, unfortunately, have had to be furloughed. So we've not had the team in place to develop some of the things. So we've lost 6 months on development. And an ideal world, you'd do everything we wanted to do in 2 years in the next 6 months. Now, that's not necessarily going to be possible, but yeah, e-commerce has been an amazing success, and it's got to stay at the top of our agenda, really, and not sink back into it's only 10% of the business. Let's just talk about stores all the time. And
if you can share this information, what type of percentage split are you anticipating versus brick and mortar sales versus e-commerce?
I think realistically, this year we're probably going to be looking at 80-20 for stores, but ultimately our ambition has got to be to get e-commerce up to at least 30%. I mean, there are a lot of retailers out there that touch 40, even 50% when they've got a decent sized store estate. And that has to be our aim down the line really to really drive it forward, because there's, despite operating in a market where physical music and film is in decline, no doubt about it, there's definitely opportunities to grow in that market. We're only in 108 stores and probably in less than 100 locations around the UK, when you consider we've got multiple stores in Manchester, Glasgow, etc.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more towns and a lot more local towns in the UK than we can actually serve customers. So it's getting all of those people and getting them online and getting them to know that we've got a great service. There's alternatives out there versus other e-commerce, other e-commerce retailers that sell music and film. There's an alternative out there that's we'd like to think is a pretty good service, some great offers on it.
You've also mentioned about the reduced headcount, and I think this is the reality that pretty much every single retailer, but probably most of the industries, are facing right now. From a senior management standpoint, are there maybe any tips that you can share in terms of how to most effectively manage the reduced headcount at the head office, across the regional teams, and at the store? Something that you've done in the past, something you're implementing today?
I think from a head office perspective, it's probably the easier one to mention, because we've had a reduced headcount since the end of March. So the teams that have been in, and it's been limited in each function, have done an amazing job basically to keep the wheels turning. I say the e-commerce business has been a lot busier than expected. The e-commerce team have stayed in the business, but other departments have seen numbers. You work with the operations team quite a lot in HMV, and that's basically been 2 people, Rupert and Lawrence, for the last sort of 8 to 10 weeks in from an operations perspective. So those guys really, communication, we have a daily call every day with the management team. There's 10 o'clock every morning, we're on a call for an hour just to go through everything. And I think, again, back to the point I said at the start about communication, it's really important, and trying to make sure between the key team that you're covering everything, and between you. Most of us have been around for quite a long time in the business, so we pretty much know how everything works top to bottom. And it's making sure we're keeping all the plates spinning between us. And if we're not, we're using other people within our teams to make sure that things are being picked up. Because there might be a person that looks after one specific area in your business, and they're not there; they're furloughed, unfortunately. Who's picking it up? Who's doing that job? And I guess that comes down to speaking with each other every single morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have noticed that even with Intelocate usage, Rupert has repurposed system for some of the e-commerce requests in warehouse. So I guess the communication bit obviously is just covering all the bases. So, and I guess the last question in our conversation, I know that we're getting close to our time limit. Everybody's also talking right now about the changes in the office work. How do you think, and I've been to your offices, you have a really great office in London. How do you think, is everybody coming back to work to the office, or are you going to implement a different program on work from home or partially working from home?
So, interesting question. We've done something a little bit different in the office. So people are starting to come back. We had some more people come back this week, getting ready for the stores reopening. And then there'll be more people coming back each week over the coming weeks. We've effectively allocated everyone a team letter, A, B, or C. And then we're rotating the team that are allowed in the office on a week-by-week basis. So Team A are allowed in the office this week, Team B are allowed in the office next week, and Team C are allowed in the office the week after. You're not allowed to mix with your teams, and the 2 weeks that you're not in the office, you work from home. We've proven just prior to lockdown that we're capable of everybody home working and getting the job done. So we are rotating it, because we don't want, with the 2 meter rule, if we add all 70 people that we've got in the office, it's really almost impossible to manage that. So we're effectively putting sort of 23, 24 people in the office at any one point, and it's a decent sized office, so it gives us a bit of space. But we're also saying, look, if it's your shift to be in the office and you want to work from home, and your manager's okay with you working from home, we're quite relaxed about it. So we're not saying when it's your week in the office, you have to come into the office. If you can do your job from home quite efficiently, that's great. Do your job from home. There's no real pressure, but I think we'll find a lot of our colleagues actually want to get out of their house and start mixing with their colleagues again and start getting into a work environment. So we're giving them that option as well, but not all at the same time. So we have groups, let's say, group the office into teams, give them times when they're allowed to come into the office, but quite flexible about them working from home for the foreseeable future until we know what's going to happen long term.
That's an interesting approach. Well, thank you very much for sharing. So I think with that, we'll probably wrap up our conversation. I thank you so much for joining today. It's a pleasure, and you've shared some really interesting information, so I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Yulia.
Bye-bye.